Hello, I am the Script Doctor, and welcome to the channel. It's Chapter 10 of The Mandalorian, second episode of the second season, and I'm kind of seeing a familiar pattern with this seasonal structure. While this episode does have some fun set pieces, I did not find it as entertaining as last week's episode, and seeing some familiar story beats in this one gives me pause. But before I get into that, let's take a look at this episode, and maybe you too will see some of the choices that give me concern. Please be advised this review contains spoilers. If you do not want to be spoiled, please feel free to return to my review after having seen the episode. We open with the Mandalorian traversing the desert, returning to his ship when we see a team of hunters prepping a trap. They snag him with a clothesline and he engages in hand-to-hand combat after his blaster is disabled. The action is not bad, the editing a little rough, but we get a fight where our hero is outnumbered and struggling to hold his own. A third bandit aims his blaster rifle that the Mandalorian snags and uses to knock out his two assailants. I find it pretty hard to believe that this rifle could take out these two so easily. That is a little convenient. After those two drop, the final bandit takes the kid hostage in exchange for the Mandalorian's jetpack. This is strange. Why barter? Weren't they after the child? That's what the subtitles conveyed. For some reason, the Mandalorian and the bandit agrees to the trade and scurries off with the jetpack. Once the child is back in the Mandalorian's arms, he activates the jetpack remotely, sending the bandit up in the air, only to drop him from extreme height a moment later. After the title drop, we see our hero carrying his supplies on his back as he walks the desert, returning to town. This is a little odd. Why is he walking? He has a jetpack. He could fly. Okay, let's say he'll have difficulty holding on to all that gear while flying. That's fine. What about those bandits? Should they not have the means of transporting their crew and the child to whatever destination they had planned if it was successful? Why not have the Mandalorian either search for their transport or wake one of those two guys he knocked out and threaten their life in exchange for their speeder or something? This action is really more for strengthening the fortitude of the character, which is a fine goal to have in writing, but for me, I need to know that this was the only option in order to be sold by it. Had they established that during the fight the Mandalorian accidentally destroyed their transport, then I can get on board with him on this journey. But really, it's just a contrived way to show off him being a badass. Once he arrives in town, Amy Sedaris informs him that Dr. Mandible knows someone who can help the Mandalorian find his people. The Mandalorian trades credits for the information, and the contact will meet them in the hangar. It's another contrived moment. The Mandalorian happens to be set back, but Amy Sedaris is gambling with the only one in town that can help him get back on course. At the hangar, Amy Sedaris gives the Mandalorian the details. He has to transport a frog lady and her eggs at sublight speed to the moon Trask, and her husband will connect him with the Mandalorians on that world. Now, these are good obstacles and good goals, but it is how we get to these goals and obstacles that are a little dodgy. We are introduced to one character that introduces us to another character that will aid the Mandalorian in a mutual transaction introducing him to other Mandalorians. So here's a question I will pose. If the purpose of Dr. Mandible is only to facilitate an introduction to the Frog Lady, do we really need a scene with Dr. Mandible? Could we get the same result without this character? And could we do it in a way to convey all the information required for the conflict and stakes? Because this is my problem. Why do with two characters what you can do with one? Also, the circumstances for the Frog Lady raise questions of their own. She's traveling with her eggs to be seated by her husband when they reconnect. That's a great motivation, but if she can't travel at hyperdrive because the eggs will be destroyed, how did she get to Tatooine in the first place? How many years or decades has she been on this journey at sublight speed?
It just raises too many questions.
But we can solve this, and in a way that plays into Mandalorian honor and his sympathies. First, we cut Dr. Mandible. He's contrived, and the entire card game scene doesn't do anything to move the story forward. We can still keep Amy Sedaris and the Mandalorian in the bar, and reveal that the Mandalorian has no more leads. This information can be overheard by the Frog Lady, but it doesn't have to be. The Frog Lady has her goal, to get to her husband. She can be in the bar, see and rush up to the Mandalorian desperate for his help. Amy Sedaris can translate that Frog Lady's been trapped on Tatooine for months, that she was en route to meet her husband on a passenger vessel. When they stopped at Tatooine to drop off other passengers, she ended up delivering her eggs prematurely. Since the eggs can't survive hyperspace and her original transport wasn't going to travel at sublight speed, they left her behind. She has very little money and has been desperately trying to find anyone willing to take her to her husband. The Frog Lady states that since he's Mandalorian, she assumes he'll be heading to her new home planet of Trask because her husband has seen other Mandalorians there as well, and assumes that's his destination. This is where we get to the same mission as in the original episode, but we cut out an unnecessary character plus that scene in the hangar and get right into the mission. It's all about story economy. Every page, every minute of a show or movie is very valuable, not just in production costs, but also in what it conveys. And when you have a limited episode count such as The Mandalorian, every moment needs to be its most important. Filler scenes or entire episodes are unacceptable. There is no reason to justify it, only excuses, and excuses are used when reasons can't be found. After the episode details are established, we find ourselves in the Razor Crest with the Mandalorian advising Frog Lady to stay strapped in while seated, and he is going to sleep during the journey. But we can't stop just yet. There is another flaw that needs to be addressed regarding the Frog Lady's value of her eggs. If these eggs are so important to her, why would she ever let them out of her sight while on the Razor Crest? Her entire mission is the safety of these eggs, and yet she leaves them unattended in the cargo bay only to allow a running gag of the child opening up the canister and sucking down the eggs. It's a weird gag to have. I'm okay with how it raises the stakes. They're traveling at sublight speed to keep the eggs safe, but the child is on board and eating the eggs. So by the time they get to Trask, there won't be any eggs to fertilize. That is, unless the Mandalorian can keep the kid away from them during the trip. I like that it is an added issue and lives up to my advice of never make things easy for your characters. It's a little heavy on the cute side of things, but I suppose since we've seen the child eat an entire frog before, it's not out of character for him. An alarm breaks the peace, waking the Mandalorian to check on the situation. He's being pursued by two X-Wing fighters who are curious as to why the Razor Crest's transponder isn't activated. The scene plays out essentially like a police checkpoint. Now that the New Republic has expanded out as far as Tatooine, there are new laws that the locals have to follow. After a back and forth and a warning that there may be Imperials camped out in this part of space, both X-Wings lock their S-foils in attack position, and one of them asks if the Mandalorian was involved with a Republic correctional transport, specifically the one from Chapter 5. Instead of answering the question, the Mandalorian veers off course trying to outrun the X-Wings. It's a neat little set piece, and when the Mandalorian does manage to evade the X-Wings and land out of sight, we get a nice new conflict with the ship falling through an ice shelf. Well, at least they are better hidden from those X-Wings. The ship suffers some damage that appears to ground them for the time being. The Mandalorian doesn't think he can do much during the day and wants to wait until nightfall and the colder temperature to see if the likelihood of getting off the planet will change. This doesn't sit well with the Frog Lady, and she manages to rewire the dismantled droid from Chapter 5 and, using his vocabulator, communicate the urgency of her situation. The Mandalorian reluctantly agrees to begin repairs. While he's working away, the child comes out and through gibberish conveys that the Frog Lady has wandered off. The Mandalorian finds her trail and follows it to a hot spring in the cavern. The Frog Lady is enjoying the water and warming up her eggs. The Mandalorian urges her to return to the ship as night is approaching, and it's more likely to be less safe as the temperature drops. The Frog Lady and Mandalorian gather up and return the eggs to their canister, and the child sniffs out other options for food. He finds a nest of eggs, claws one open, and eats the baby spider inside. While the child feasts on the rest of the contents of that egg, the other eggs begin to hatch and the spiders surround the Mandalorian and Frog Lady. Larger spiders, followed by the big mama spider, close in, and it's a foot race back to the ship. What I find strange is that given the large number of spiders closing in, the Mandalorian chooses to draw his blaster and shoot them individually, whereas if I were in his position, I'd be aiming the wrist-mounted flamethrower and taking them out in large groups. After throwing some proximity mines to take out the big mama spider, the Mandalorian finally activates his flamethrower and off-screen burns those little critters away. Once he gets back to their ship, the Mandalorian is still only using his blaster until he gets to the cockpit. It's not until after a few more spiders make their way deeper inside that he lights them up again to get those doors closed. He almost gets the ship off the ground when Big Mama Spider returns, landing on top of it. Before it can do more damage, the two X-Wing pilots come to the rescue and blast away all the spiders, saving the Mandalorian and his passengers. Carson, he's the new X-Wing pilot, exposits that they should arrest the Mandalorian for his participation in the attempted escape of the Twi'lek criminal from Chapter 5. But because he captured the other three and tried to save the New Republic officer on the ship, they're going to let him go. Chapter 10 is very similar to Chapter 2. They both start with the Mandalorian returning to his ship with the child. They both have him facing off against rival hunters wanting the child. He ends up in a situation where his ship is wrecked and in need of repair, and all around a story about a species and their egg. He has to face off against a giant monster in a cave, and once it's defeated, he leaves the planet to fly off to the next episode. There's not much to say about the back end. As you can tell, it's merely a set piece with not a lot going on beyond that, which is a continuing problem with The Mandalorian. As a set piece on its own, I think it's fine, but after they crash through the ice, the beats are less cause and effect and more effect followed by effect followed by effect. Did the frog lady need to go and bathe in that spring with her eggs? No, but it got the characters to the cave with all those spiders. Did the X-Wings need to arm their weapons when learning that the Razor Crest was part of that jailbreak scheme? Especially when we learned later that they weren't going to arrest him anyway? Nope, but it got the Razor Crest to flee and crash into this planet. While it does somewhat follow cause and effect, the rationale behind the cause is questionable. If I were lucky enough to be in the writer's room, I'd have pitched that the X-Wings tried to arrest the Mandalorian with no intention of letting him go. I'd have kept the chase on the planet because that was cool, and I'd also have him crash through that ice shelf. But what I would have changed is that beneath that ice shelf is an Imperial bunker, calling back to what the X-Wing pilots mentioned to the Mandalorian. The Imperials surround the ship and take our team prisoner. I also wouldn't have these imps be part of Moff Gideon's faction so that they have no idea that they're sitting on a bounty for the child. But I would build on the gag of the child eating the eggs, revealing that the eggs were a delicacy during the days of the Empire, and that the frog lady species were held prisoner and their eggs harvested during that time. I'd throw in a spider scurrying around the compound and then crawling away through the hole the Razor Crest made when finding the bunker. Now we have the Mandalorian in a tough position. Does he go back on his word to help the frog lady and turn her over in exchange for his freedom, or does he risk himself and the child by fighting his way out of the bunker knowing he'll most likely die? It's not enough to just put your character in a difficult situation, it also can be a fun idea to present them with a moral choice. Do they sell a part of their soul in exchange for the quick and easy path, or do they have the fortitude to take the harder journey with greater risk but retain their core values? We got that moment in Chapter 3 after the Mandalorian dropped off the kid. He was about to leave but chose to go back, rescue the child even at the risk of himself and his covert. To close out my new ending segment of this chapter, I would have had the Imperials refuse a trade deal with the Mandalorian and put him in a holding cell. I then have that lone spider return with all its friends and giant parents to attack the Imperials and feast on their bodies. This gives the Mandalorian an opportunity to escape and presents him with another choice. Make a beeline to his ship or detour and save the frog lady and her eggs. Have him shoot through Imperials and the spiders to rescue the frog lady as he makes it to his ship, then you can throw in the X-Wings for the rescue. I would add in a transport ship as well with some New Republic soldiers. They clear out the spiders and take in the Imperials as prisoners. They tell the Mandalorian they were planning to arrest him and figured the massive cluster of spiders heading to a large hole was leading to his ship. Finding the Imperial bunker they were looking for was an added bonus, and they figure it's a bigger win to take back the imps than process the Mandalorian. They remark that if they didn't see the Mandalorian shooting up the soldiers while escaping, they'd have assumed he was with them and taken him in as well. But his actions here and the actions they have on record with that Republic prisoner ship tell them that for now, he's okay in their book. They help patch up his ship and escort him to Trask. They depart as he enters orbit, and that's the end of the episode, or at least how I would have done it. To me, this story didn't feel like it really escalated in the areas that mattered as the episode progressed. It followed a close beat pattern to Chapter 2, and I'm worried this might be the case with the rest of the season. It is a little too early to tell at this moment. For now, I'm willing to call it a coincidence, and I hope that's all it is by the season's end. Here's hoping that next week's episode of Chapter 11 will get us back on course with the story, and we see some great character development, and who knows, maybe a couple of fun set pieces as well. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have anything to add to this episode, please leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and never forget, it all starts with the script.